Rubber bands are flexible. I like playing with them. I like to shoot them. Ow! I shot myself with the rubber band. Ow! Hey, I'm Mark, and this is your Cornerstone Daily Connection. Well, rubber bands are, in fact, very flexible. And, in fact, if you have a non-flexible rubber band, a very rigid, that's when you know it's about to break. Well, oftentimes, God calls us to be a part of a team that also needs to be very, very flexible. Well, just like rubber bands, oftentimes our teams that God brings us and makes us a part of have to kind of bend and flex together. You know, I've been a part of a couple teams, and I remember early on in my Christian life, I thought this team is it. This team is going to last forever, right? I became a Christian, and I was in the youth ministry, and I was part of a youth group, and I was like, this is it. And then people graduate, and they go different places, and I'm like, oh, now what do? I'm kind of floating over here. The team that I thought would be permanent, it turns out it wasn't, you know. And then I remember serving in kids ministry in California. I'm like, this is it. This is a very permanent, very rigid structure. But that too was for a season. It was for a time. And then that team changed. I ended up moving over to Missouri. And I remember being part of a community and part of a team. And I was like, this is it. This is my team, right? This is it. And that changed also. I remember moving to Las Vegas with my wife. And we were like, this is it. We're in Las Vegas, this team. Okay, truthfully, that never really, I mean, it's Las Vegas. What do you want? What is Las Vegas? You know, but still, it had to bend and it had to flex. And that's something that is just true about working in teams, is that God needs us to be like rubber bands. God calls us to be flexible. And we certainly see that in today's reading with the Apostle Paul, don't we? Here we are. We're looking in the book of Acts, chapter 15. Going down here to verse 22, and there is this sending out of the Apostle Paul. In verse 22, it says, "It seemed good to the apostles and the elders of the whole church to choose men from among them and to send to Antioch with Paul and Barnabas." And so there's this team, right? Paul and Barnabas were there. And Paul and Barnabas, which is this team that seems pretty rigid, right? We've read a little while now in the book of Acts, and Paul and Barnabas, I mean, they're a thing. It was Saul and Barnabas, and now it's Paul and Barnabas. It's a thing. Well, guess what? There's some flexibility here in God's teams. 6, and after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let us return and visit the brothers in every city where we proclaim the word of the Lord and see how they are." Now, Barnabas wanted to take with them John, called Mark, because every good team needs someone named Mark, right? Well, Paul didn't think so. But Paul thought best not to take with them one who had withdrawn from them in Pamphylia and who had not gone with them to the work. So basically, Paul left on a previous missionary journey, and because of that, now Paul is saying, you know, I don't want to take him with us. And so, in verse 39, a sharp disagreement arose, so that they separated from each other. Barnabas took Mark, and they sailed on to Cyprus, but Paul took Silas and departed, and they commended each other to the brothers, and they kind of seemingly went like different ways. Now, the good news about this is, just so you know, this is not a permanent rift between Paul and the Apostle Mark. In fact, they are reunited. And Mark becomes so important to Paul later on in life that as he has been, you know, at the end of Acts, right, he's on house arrest, and then he goes out and he's arrested again. And ultimately, Paul will be killed because of Christ. But before that, with that impending death sentence coming in 2 Timothy, who does he ask for? He asks for Mark. In 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 11, it reads, "Luke alone is with me. Get Mark and bring him with you, for he is very useful to me for ministry." It's very useful to me for ministry. Yeah, they were BFFs, I'm saying. They, you know, there was this sense of flexibility. You know, it was Paul and Barnabas, and that shifted and changed. And I know if you've been around Cornerstone a lot, there's a lot of shifting that has happened in the last only 6 months, right? Well, Rachel and I are here. That's one huge thing. But it's just ministries are different, and as the church grows, there seems to be this constant state of shifting and flexing, and there's a new background on the stage now, and there's this stuff, and it's great, but it's also different. And there's this temptation that we want to be very rigid. We want to hold on to things. One of our values that we have as a church is to have an open hand in our ministry. Paul had an open hand. He was willing to not allow this disagreement to destroy the ministry, but to allow Barnabas and Mark to go off in their direction, and he went off in a different direction, right? He was open-handed in that way. Our challenge today is to be flexible like rubber bands. There's a lot of bending and a lot of shifting, but it's good bending and it's good shifting because the gospel is being proclaimed. Maybe where you are, you're like, wow, there's a lot of changes happening in my life, in my job, in my family. Maybe kids are graduating. Maybe it's just a lot to have happen. But the challenge is to think about this. God desires us to be a people that are open-handed, to be flexible like rubber bands. Are you being flexible like a rubber band? Sometimes it's easier to say it than to do it. Well, I hope that you can find some encouragement here in the walk of Paul, just knowing that he had to be flexible too. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.